share with us what's very complex about filmmaking and what you do?
So in working on a film, there's always a large team. I've had the opportunity to be a director and a producer in a lot of places, but tied to that, there's an enormous number of experts who are all contributing in all kinds of ways. And in some ways, it's complex is an interesting word to think about as applied to filmmaking. Complicated, it's not complicated. It is multi-leveled, and you can see I'm kind of making a ball here. It's all integrated. One of the things that's really interesting is that the clock's ticking all the time, and everybody has to be working along the way. I've often thought of filmmaking in some ways as like it's a taxi meter, because the meter's always running whether you're going forward or whether you're standing still. And inside of that, one has to be really aware of making sure all the different units are all contributing in the right kind of time.
Okay, you just mentioned the taximeter, which I totally agree. So from the point of time where we did filmmaking with film, and now we went into the digital era, right? So it's still ticking, but how do you think it has progressed?
In the time I've been making film, I've gone from celluloid to digital and back and forth. And part of what was interesting in the days of celluloid is that we shot the stuff and we saw it 2 weeks later. So we had to make a lot of decisions knowing that it was going to be okay. Nowadays, we have the ability to use a screen right there while we're doing it. And on the one hand, that's very useful, but on the other hand, there can be a lot of time spent in that looking rather than moving forward. In one of the classes we have at ADM, 16 millimeter class, and talking to the students, they find it really interesting that they no longer have the screen to look at when they're doing the shooting. They do the shooting and then they move on. So it's partly about being able to make enough decisions to know where the quality is and what kind of time it can take.
So talking about that, right, based being in Singapore, and if you notice that the filmmaking was always looked at the West, and then though we had like Akira and all these great filmmakers in the East, but now there's more concentration on the East, as in the Asian filmmaking. So how do you think that transfer had happened and the growth of Asian filmmaking?
I wear two hats thinking about the filmmaking. One is as a professor at ADM teaching filmmaking, and the other is as a filmmaker. In the last 5 years since I've been here, I've seen the growth of the whole filmmaking community inside Singapore. There have been several feature films made that have gotten international recognition, won international film festivals that have all been, as they were, homegrown out of the Singapore community. And at the same time, they've had international crews on them, so there's a lot of cross-fertilization that goes on. This whole idea that's happening in Singapore, where there's already 4 languages, there's a huge community, there's a mix going all the time. I see that as a very additive thing that's going on. I have noticed that from a growth point of view, that there is a lot of very high quality production right from the start. And the projects that I'm also seeing that come out of the film school are on par with all kinds of films that I've seen at universities all around the world. They're not trying to learn, they come up right at the top.
What do you think the local filmmaking is doing right, and what is next for the aspiring filmmakers?
What I observe in the Singapore film community is actually very high quality film production going on. And as a part of it, that's much more like the independent community. I mean, MediaCorp is in fact producing a lot of work, and people get the opportunity to work through MediaCorp, and at the same time also doing lots of independent projects. I've been really glad to see that there is in the last 2 years a whole freelancing contract that's been put into place. I think that will be very helpful to this whole community, because very much filmmaking is a team collaboration where lots of people join in for special periods of time. And having that well laid out in advance, what are the conditions for working, that kind of thing, I think are improving the professional quality of everything across the board. In thinking about how to tell stories and how they relate to the idea of complexity, one of the things I've really noticed about films is that they can do time stories. They can go much longer in time in the future and in the past. And they can also go up and down in scale. They can do orders of magnitude up and down in scale. Both those directions are really useful. One of my IMAX films I did was a 400 million year look at time and up to the present with a 50-year look into the future. And the fact that film as a storytelling technique can actually create imaginary spaces that are real spaces in the future and in the past, gives us insights into where we are, who we are, where we are in the flow of things. The other part that's really interesting is how we can show really large groups of people. We can begin to understand that we're not just alone in the world. We have other people around us all the time. And those are all fit into the storytelling in films, which help us mirror what it is in our own lives. My personal work is always working with trying to do science documentaries, so they have to have a real grounding in fact as a way of trying to tell the stories. And I find that one can make anything magical in film, but in fact doing something that's showing how real things work is a wonderful challenge to try to work with.
And I think that's the complex part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.